And with us now is Keith Herkalo, the author of The Battles at Plattsburgh, September 11th, 1814. Nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
We're hearing so much about the book. People are really talking about it.
It's doing very well, thank you. And Donald Graves, who is in the film, wrote the foreword for the book, yes. It's doing very well, and it is the true story of what happened here at Plattsburgh, contrary to some of the things people have heard over the years.
Well, the story of the famous naval battle of Plattsburgh, we've heard about. Certainly people who live around here know about that. But it seems that nationwide, the Battle of Plattsburgh, or the battles, as you discuss in your book, have either been overshadowed or not necessarily forgotten, but they seem more obscured by some of the other key parts of the War of 1812. And yet you and many other historians and scholars will argue that the Battle of Plattsburgh was one of the, if not the, major battles of the War of 1812.
Absolutely. The orders issued by Bathurst, who was the British Secretary of War, they speak for themselves. The main battles at Plattsburgh were, in fact, the deciding factor in the British war plan. It wasn't Baltimore, it wasn't Washington, it wasn't New Orleans. They were only diversions. In the orders, it states so specifically that those campaigns were nothing but diversions. Plattsburgh suffers from something I call lack of megalopolis. We don't have a large population base around here, as opposed to someplace like Washington or Baltimore. Or New Orleans. You know, there are millions of people in that metropolitan area, and the focus goes where the money and the people are. So we suffer from that.
And we're going to hear about the battles at Plattsburgh coming up a little bit later in the documentary. But again, the title mentions battles. We've heard about the naval battle on Cumberland Bay, the famous battle. But what were some of the other battles, or what was the other battle going on at the same time that maybe people don't know as much about?
Okay. Well, first of all, the battle on the water was in fact a decisive American victory, although none of the ships sank. It was a signal victory. As McDonough says, the British surrendered their flag and surrendered their fleet. However, on land, the largest invasion force in the war was right here at Plattsburgh. It was not in Baltimore. It was not in Washington. There were only 4,500 troops in the Chesapeake area. There were 7,000 that attacked New Orleans. Here on September the 11th, 1814, there were 10,351 British soldiers right here in Plattsburgh. And on the American side, all the troops had gone to Sackett's Harbor for what the American government thought was a major invasion at Sackett's Harbor, ordered all the troops from here to go there to Sackett's Harbor, leaving only those who couldn't walk and shoulder weapons, all of the injured, all of the infirmed, and the prisoners, and 20 school kids. So General Macomb, his job was to fend off 10,351 British soldiers, and he had 20 school kids helping. So this was an incredible feat of, as René Chartrand calls him. René is also in the video that we see today. He calls him the master of deception because he made his little tiny army look huge. And unfortunately, General Prevost had somehow in his later years, in my opinion, lost his military focus. He wasn't as much a fighter as he was, and what should you call him, a politician or maybe an ambassador?
Well, he was the Governor General of Canada.
He was the Governor General of Canada.
Canada, a British colony at the time.
That's correct, and the military leader of the entire Americas. And he had 3 bulldog generals here who had just defeated Napoleon, and he wouldn't let them go. And that was one of his downfalls.
Is that one of the great mysteries of how they were unable to advance in that invasion, march right down the Champlain Valley past Macomb and his troops and get to where they wanted to go? That was their plan all along, their major plan as far as invading the U.S.
Yes, they were bringing an invasion force of 11,000 across the border. They were going to march down to Plattsburgh because there was no army here to speak of. They were going to invade Plattsburgh, capture all the supplies. The largest supply point for the Northern Army was right here in Plattsburgh. All those supplies were right here. It was easy for the picking. And with the naval battle on the bay, what they were going to do was take both of those in concert, and it was an assured victory. That's the way they looked at it. But on September the 6th, when the British Army got here, General Prevost decided to wait for the Navy. And that was one of the prime reasons that things tended to sour. And it got worse for him on the 11th because, according to the general on the ground here, General Brisbane, for whom Brisbane, Australia was named, he said there were no spies, there were no guides, and there was no plan.
Speaking of the troops that were stationed here in Plattsburgh, Dr. Tim Abel is a professor of anthropology at SUNY Canton and also Jefferson Community College in Watertown.
Good friend of ours.
And for the past 2 years, you have teamed up on an archaeological dig here, looking for an encampment called Pike Cantonment. And let's listen to Dr. Abel and have him describe exactly what they're looking for there.
Wonderful.
The site we're sitting on now was the winter home of the 15th Infantry during the winter of 1812-1813. They had just returned from an unsuccessful attempt to sort of grab a foothold in Canada during the first year of the war, and it was now time to think about where the troops were going to winter for the year. So they chose this spot largely because it was available to them. Back then they did not have eminent domain. They couldn't just park anywhere they wanted to. They had to actually lease the land from somebody who was willing to lease it to them. And in the Northeast that was not an easy thing to find because the Northeast was very much against the war. And so they arrived here in the first part of November of 1812 and commenced to building about 200 log huts in which they would live during the rest of the winter. It took them about 30 days to build these huts, and before that time they existed essentially with what they were issued when they left Albany, and that was no more than a blanket. So that adds a little bit of incentive, I think, to get your hut done. So it took them 30 days to build the huts. They moved into the first ones on Christmas Eve, 1812. But by mid-January, the huts were still not finished. Many of them still did not have floors. They did not have chimneys. So they were the bare minimum in terms of comfort. You know, probably not much better than camping in the woods. But they lived here for that entire winter. We know through records that about 200 men died that winter of different diseases and frostbite. They subsisted here until February of 1813, and then they were given orders to march out. They marched out beginning on March 4th, 1813. And their new duty station was 175 miles west of here at Sackett's Harbor. And so they were all moved out by probably about the 1st of April. They were all moved out. They took part in what would become known as the Battle of York later that spring. That's the battle where then General Pike was killed, and his remains still rest at Sackett's Harbor. I think it's important to really hammer home the fact that this project is really the realization of a lot of work by a lot of people, and the fact that Keith Herkalo would not let me forget about this site is something that is to be commended. We also would not be here without the help of Clinton Community College and the field course, as well as the Teacher Resource Center and the courses we offer through there. We would not be here without the support of the Battle of Plattsburgh Association. And the effort to preserve this site really needs to be credited to the County of Clinton and the town of Plattsburgh and the city of Plattsburgh. They're the ones that are really starting to put in the infrastructure that's going to hopefully protect this site into the future.
Keith Herkalo, your persistence paid off. And
Thank
what a dig it's turned out to be. This past summer, uncovering evidence of the huts there. The first summer, finding a button from the uniform of a soldier, the 15th Regiment, two buttons, muskets. So you have found definitive proof that encampment was there, and that's important because there had been some question or dispute over exactly where the soldiers were.
You're right. Over the years, this site was purported to be at 6 different places. Now, my math shows that that's almost impossible. So how can you have a site in 6 different places? You can't. And when you get all the research and you pin it all down, Dr. Everest was right, Alan Everest from SUNY Plattsburgh, years ago, no longer with us. His research led, with Lee Harrison and a bunch of other people, led the way to say this is where Pike's Cantonment is. Now, The importance of it is it marks the point at which the British crossed the river in September of 1814. It shows the movement of the ground troops. If you know where Pike's Cantonment is, you know where the British crossed the river, you know suddenly the movement of the 10,000 British troops, you know where they were. And it puts all of the research into crystal clarity. And you know, just an amazing thing. Last year, we did one small test pit, 3 foot by 3 foot, 1 meter square. And that's after we had found the buttons and after we had found the musket ball and the thimble and some other military items, pinpointing that it was in fact the 15th Regiment. But then digging down into that nice little 3 foot pit, we show that there's nothing underneath it, there's nothing on top of it, there's one occupation layer, and that is the 15th Regiment from the United States military ever. There's never been anything else at that particular site. It's just amazing.
And as the British went through, they burned it to the ground, which made it a little more of a challenge to look for remnants left behind.
True. They actually burned it down in 1813, Tom. They came up the river. They didn't know where it was by land. And that was their downfall in 1814. They tried to go through the woods. They didn't know how to get there. So they got lost for almost an hour while the battle on the lake was going on. It's a wonderful story. It's all 100% true. The primary documents are there from both the British and the American side. You can see them all for yourself. You can read them in the book. You can look at the references and go look at the documents themselves. Don't believe a word I say. You know, take it for what it's worth.
And the Battle of Plattsburgh Association and Dr. Tim Abel, you hope to continue with this archaeological dig for several more years to see what more you can uncover.
Indeed, we believe we have, the archaeological dig showed us this year, we uncovered 25% of one of the officers' huts. Now, the speculation is rampant right now. What if it's Zebulon Pike's hut? It is the furthest one from the river. It could be, we don't know. But we've uncovered wonderful artifacts, pieces of polished plate glass, which would have been in a picture frame. And they hit the floor and they fell through the floorboards. And then, of course, when the place was burned down, the regular glass that was in the windows melted. But the plate glass, which was under the floor, the little shards of it, did not. We have china that is gilt with silver. And just, again, pieces and shards of it, but we know that it was an officer's hut. We have nails, of course, when, we're back into physics now. When something reaches about 1200 degrees, a piece of iron, it changes. It anneals on the outside, and the exterior gets coated with hematite. It protects it from rust. So there are nails in the ground that have been there for 200 years. They look like they came out of a box from Aubuchon.
So a blessing in disguise in some ways.
Just amazing.
And the timing couldn't be better. This discovery coming right around the time of the 200th anniversary has renewed interest in the significance of the Battle of Plattsburgh and the history here in our region.
You're right. It was serendipitous for us that this all happened at the right time. It could very well have happened 6 or 7 years ago, but with the contention that there was in the historic community, with the fact that we didn't have any archaeological difference, or excuse me, any archaeological proof, the fact that we couldn't get an archaeologist to even entertain the thought, and it took 2.5 years to get Dr. Abel interested, because this particular piece of property had been surveyed twice in the past 5 years. And he said, Keith, don't get your hopes up. And I said, Tim, you need to come to Plattsburgh, and as soon as you realize that, you're going to make history here. And this is Dr. Abel's second National Register site from the War of 1812 in 1 year. We are now on the National Register as of the 14th of August, 2012.